So, welcome, Australian wing of the interviewees for this discussion about Pochven. We're going to be talking mostly about observatory flashpoints. They are one of the most largely talked about points of Pochven in the general conversation because people know about the big fights that come from them. They know about the money that comes from them, even if they don't necessarily have the best understanding of what any of that actually means. So first, I'd love to get started with some introductions. Just talk a little bit about yourself and maybe tell us a bit about how you got into Pochven in the first place and what you're doing there now. So if you don't mind, let's get started with Proxay.
G'day. That's really stereotypical, isn't it? Hi. I've been playing Eve since I was 2 years old. About 15 years now, maybe. No, but I did start in about 2003, 4, 5, whatever. I've played most areas of the game, blobs through to everything else. Not too long ago, about the beginning of 2021, we were living in Tribute, peaceful warlords and gate campers killing herons all day. It was, honest, hard work. We got bullied out of the region by big blocks, and just after we finished the defense campaigns and things like that, we found some new content for us. Gate restricted Pochven at the time, but it was interesting because if you put the legwork in, there was a appeal in being in a non-capital region where numbers could be kind of shaped and controlled, and looked like it was both good money, good place to live. New kind of content no one's ever tried before at that point, or not many people have tried before, and we bring a certain flavor of violence to whatever we're trying to do that some of the role-playing groups maybe try, but I don't know if they're quite as violent as us or committed to violence. They kind of have a blend of people in their roster. So yeah, that's how we ended up in Pochven. That's how I ended up there. I tagged into Rote's activities probably about a month or two after it truly got started. I was recovering from the fatigue of war, we'll call it.
And I don't think you mentioned it, or if you did, I missed it, but just for heads up for listeners, you're in Rote Capel, the alliance that I am also a part of, but just wanted to make sure that was clear. Now, let's move on to, I know you use the character Dora in game. Is that what you want me to call you?
Yeah, sure. Dora is fine, but I'll explain a little bit my other characters as well. So, I started playing a little bit after Proxy, probably 2012 is when I started playing, and I've had many characters over the years, but my main character is Fast Rage, which is I've done nullsec, wormholes, a little bit of lowsec, and then a couple of years ago I joined Pandemic Horde after a break, and had a bunch of mining characters called Dora the Miner. That's where the Dora characters come from. And I got into Pochven with a few of my wormhole buddies in Gore and Clade. They invited me to one of their fleets, and I had a great time. So I ended up using my Dora characters that were in Horde to play with Horde while Goran was still doing wormhole stuff. And that's how I started multiboxing with all those characters. And recently, a few other people within Horde also started multiboxing, and we sort of became a little bit of a clique within Horde that would work together and play with each other. And then some disagreements within Horde popped up, and the people that were doing the multiboxing with each other decided that we would prefer to leave Horde and form our own small corporation of about 3 or 4. Actually, it's 5 real life people, and that's currently where I'm at now.
Thank you, thank you. So we're going to skip the whole general introduction to Pochven. I'll do that with the Euros and Alec later, especially because Alec's going to be a great soundboard for that, as he's going to be the only person in the conversation who hasn't spent dozens and dozens of hours in Pochven at this point. So I want to move on to one area that I think both of you have a lot of very useful information on, and that is the advantages and disadvantages of living in Pochven when it comes to fighting over observatory flashpoints. as both Proxay and I know, since, Rogue Capel, they've been living in Pochven for almost a year at this point. We're definitely coming up on that time. And Fast Rage, obviously, you were with Horde for a fair while, essentially staging out of the Fortizar that they own there, before moving on. And I assume that you still have a lot of your stuff largely staged in Pochven for when you're doing these things.
Yep, we currently live in Nani now, which is basically right next door to Skarkon, so not much has changed for us in that regard.
Yeah, so being staged in Nani, right, how does that help you, being already in Pochven as you're looking to fight over these sites? What kind of advantages do you kind of derive from that?
Well, I think one of the key points that your viewers probably want to understand is when these observatories spawn, getting to them quickly is key. Like getting eyes on them, finding where they are, and then getting chips to them quickly, because the first room of the observatory is a dead space grid. Well, both of the rooms are, but the first room is a dead space grid. So if you're able to set up first, it's extremely difficult for another fleet to warp in on you. So by being, living in Pochven, being able to respond quickly, you're able to find and get to these observatories first, which is a huge advantage.
Yeah, so, and when you're talking about setting up, there's the outside room and the inner room. How do you leverage that in terms of either looking to start a fight if you're disadvantaged, or if you're just trying to, get the site done and get the money and get out?
So if I'm personally, my corp, if we're trying to just get in and get out, we're not looking for a fight. What we'll do is we'll get to the observatory first, clear out the waves of rats that fight each other to open up the observatory, and then try to get into the second room as fast as possible, because the advantages of being in the second room while your opponent is still in the first room are huge. You can prevent your opponent from coming in using dictors to block the acceleration gate that you use to access the second room. You can do things like boost them around. There's just so many ways that you can mess up a fleet that's trying to get into the second room. So getting in there quickly and starting the site, because the site runtime is really quite quick. It's only about 10 minutes if you're competently doing the site. So getting in there quick, getting in, and then getting out quick as well is key if you're just looking to run the sites.
Yeah, so the other aspect of it as well is it depends on whether your standings of the Triglavians are positive and Edencom is positive as well. The starting fight outside, there's Edencom and Triglavian rats fighting each other. So if you're Edencom positive, the Trigs will shoot you as well. They sometimes preference you over shooting the Trig rats, sorry, the Edencom rats. If you're Trig positive, Edencom negative, then Edencom will sometimes go for you, which most people living in Pochven end up naturally skewing towards trig positive, access to stations, services, etc. But also just running the flashpoints itself, you take massive hits to Edencom standings. So it just kind of biases that way. Though there are many people who maintain dual positive, which is difficult, but you do that through killing rogue drones and sleepers, drifter rats mostly. They both within Pochven provide you positive standings to both Edencom and Trigs, and that allows you to sit there and be neutral to both, so they won't shoot you in any case. If you then access the second room and cloak up some dictors on the first room's acceleration gate to access the second room, as other fleets come in thinking that you're doing battle with NPCs and distracted, or maybe under some level of pressure, they'll find sleeping waves of rats waiting to shoot them, plus you waiting to shoot them, which can be extremely difficult pressure on a fleet coming in, especially if there's dictors again cloaked on the first room to potentially cut down the fleet size entering. If you had 20 people entering, you bubble and stop 10 of them, for example, that's half a fleet. Maybe you've stopped all their logi. Now they're not just at the mercy of you, but also the NPCs as well, that they are probably not positive to.
Yeah, so being able to get that first mover advantage definitely is a very powerful tool. One other thing that I do want to make sure we touch on, and I know this because I've taken part in a fair few of these, is the ability to form ad hoc and kind of look for content or target fleets that you see in your home system, essentially, right? So Proxy, I mean, we've been on a bunch of these together, right? Talk about kind of the process of if we're, just hanging out in Pochven because we live there and we see, one of those Vedmek fleets or one of those Ishtar fleets out and about or doing a flashpoint in the system we're staging in or right next door. What we can kind of do and take advantage of because we live in Pochven.
Sure. So just for the listeners, there is a prevalent skew towards having 15 characters effectively in the fleet to finish the site. The reason for that is the payouts stack up, increment up to 15 to the highest possible point of 3.5 billion ISK split across 15 characters. At 16 characters, it becomes a 3 billion ISK pool split across 16. So there's very steep penalties for dragging more characters in fleet. You can work around that through dropping characters before the site finishes from fleet, but it just becomes complicated. So generally speaking, you are looking at fleet sizes ranging from about 12 to 20, which is quite fightable for fast response and things like that. So now going back to proximity, living, etc., you send out dictors or shuttles or what have you, scouts. You locate fresh flashpoint. Usually probe scan window will have the flashpoint as an anomaly, and your overview or the beacon to actually warp to it won't be on your overview or won't be in space yet. So that's a fresh one, for example. In that case, you'd be confident not the rats on the outside haven't started fighting yet because the site hasn't been activated, and there's no chance of anyone being there set up with any kind of trap already. If you can then locate one of those sites or find a fleet moving towards one and get in front of them with dictors, you can then delay their entry to the second room, giving you time to get your mates together to head over there in what would be an ideal counter to whatever you're facing.
And just being able to get there in a pretty short amount of time because you're undocking, you're already in Potch, and you're ready to go. Definitely makes sense. So we've talked a little bit about the advantages of being able to stage in Pochven. Are there any disadvantages that are things that you come across that are like pain points or things that slow you down, given that you are explicitly staged in Pochven for this?
I'll go first here. So a few penalties in Pochven include warp speed, which is pretty, like every ship is about 30-40% slower than normal.
I'm gonna cut you. So a lot of this stuff, remember these like general Pochven things, I'm gonna cover the other time. We're gonna deal with that.
Okay.
So don't feel a need to explain little details. I'm just asking like, hey, like, what disadvantages do we run into, right, as rogue in terms of trying to do things because we live in Pochven, in terms of fighting over flashpoints?
Yeah. So Pochven's got 27 systems. We live in one of them at the top. If you end up with a flashpoint spawn 10 jumps away, 15 jumps away, it takes quite a considerable amount of time to move things over there, right? So let's say you're trying to fight in one location and you're not living outside of Pochven. If you need help from your mates, they have to come all the way around, or they need to leave through a wormhole and filament in with a constellation filament to draw them close to you, which can take a considerable amount of time. We're talking the range of 5, 10, 15 minutes to get backup of any kind if you find yourself, pretty vastly outnumbered or outgunned or whatever. So there's basically very limiting backup. If you live outside, on the other hand, so for example, larger groups like Horde and Frat, for example, have huge memberships. They have some living inside and some living outside, obviously, from their nullsec holdings. If they come into trouble, they can demand people from outside Pochven form into groups of 15, grab a filament from a market, hangar, whatever, and immediately be within 3 to 5 jumps of you with something to escalate. And usually that's not just 15 people, it could be 30, 45, etc. And so very quickly you can end up with main fleet from one of the large entities kind of just dropping straight onto you within a few minutes of engaging in a fight.
I will say one of the disadvantages we found when we all decided to depart from Horde was that we wanted to use shared hangars, and you need Triglavian standings to be able to rent a corporation office within the stations there. That's definitely not something that you have to do if you're living in high sec or another area of space in a citadel. You can just give permissions automatically. Fortunately, we've all been in Pochven long enough that we do have the Triglavian standings, but for the first week before they updated, we actually couldn't rent an office, and we had to just trade all the public stuff like drones and filaments and things like that. And it was very tedious. But that's behind us now. But that's something that if a new group is moving into Pochven, they don't have standings, they'd have to realize that sort of thing that does occur.
Me and
Yeah,
Proxay both made many pings when we transitioned to stations, exhorting people to get their standings up, because for folks who may not know, the standings in stations in Pochven, or for stations in Pochven, if you are just trying to do services for yourself, it only matters what your standings to Triglavians are. But for the corporation to open an office, it takes the average of all the standings of characters that have some standing, either positive or negative. So if somebody has never shot a Triglavian or a Eton-Com ship, they don't count. But if someone has, then you need to get the average of all those people up to 4.0, I believe, in order for the corporation corporation really to make offices in order to share stuff in hangars. So it can be quite annoying.
Yeah, I'm just checking. I was going to say, I was just checking at the moment, and Stimulus Corporation has 4.12 average, even though we've been living here for 18 months. We have some sandbags. I'm going to name our glorious leader, Garrick Shadowbane, as 0.0, which definitely hurts the average quite a lot.
Yeah, and then if you're new to Pochven, even things like just being able to repair in a station is gated off until is it 2.0? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a significant time investment just to even be able to repair in a station. Fortunately, there are some Freeport citadels. There's actually quite a few around. But if you don't have access to them, you're living in a system that doesn't have a citadel, you're going to be grinding those standings before you can even repair, or trading your ship to your mates for them to do it for you.
Yeah. One thing that I think makes a good segue into something I want to make sure we touch on is you're talking about trying to deal with groups like Horde or Frat. In the past, once upon a time, it was goons, but hasn't been for a while. But in any case, larger groups putting together a lot of numbers. There's going to be some discussion with the others about different doctrine types and challenges. But one doctrine that particularly Proxay, you have been flying a lot of, and that I know came around really as a direct response to trying to have to fight 50 to 60 plus people at once, is the Barghests doctrine. And one of the main reasons I want to talk about it with you is it flies very differently from pretty much everything else. Almost every other doctrine for Flashpoints that is looking to be a powerful fighting composition is a brawling one. And the Barghests that wrote Flies are definitely the opposite of that. They're very fast, very projection-based. And so I'd love to hear a little bit from you about kind of why you use them and their biggest advantages and why you like flying them so much.
There's actually another reason they came around for this. So going way back in history here, Murray was the first, I think, propose yourself. You were the first to propose using the Barghests, and they kind of sat around for a bit, and we didn't really pick them up for a bit because the fights we were getting, the what we were facing, wasn't really the right response to it. About ships, doctrines, etc., they're all tools. You kind of just whatever you're going to face, you kind of pick the right tool to take the fight, whether it's a good fight or whether you're just looking to execute someone in a cruel way. The first time we used Barghests in Pochven for a fight, I believe, was against Red Alliance Icaturses. And the reason we chose the Barghests was because I was sick of flying heavy armor or various other comps that were slower, and we only have one or two pointing ships, and every single time we go after someone, most of their ships would get away because they're all faster than us, and as soon as they realize they're not going to win a fight, they just piss off, and you get no kills, and it kind of sucked. So we brought out Barghests because everyone fits a point, and they're all as fast as the hacks, and so you just, who cares if they starburst or run away? You run them down. But as it evolved over time, hacks mostly moved out of meta except for the Ishtars. Everyone moved away from Ikaturses, Vedmax, and all other flavors in between, and it became two dominant doctrines used in Pochven, which was Marauders, Lashaks, and Nesters, and flavors therein. Ishtars maintained a lot of presence, and also there are a few prevalent Marauder fleets of about 12 to 14 Vargas and a Sleipnir, or 14 Paladins and Astarte, variations therein. The way the Barghests fly different, and why they're so, why I lean into them heavily, is because when you do fight larger fleets or even heavier fleets, the Barghests aren't winning through sheer damage, because their burst damage might be 1500 DPS each, but their sustained damage is only about 750 once you factor in reload. So they're actually quite low on damage, but they maintain a much higher speed than all other battleships and most other ships you'll face. So they can control range, and you can basically hold your opponent in position through the super long point that's there, and really long newts as well. You have a medium weapon system on a heavy ship, so you prevent small tackle getting onto you. The missiles as well travel somewhere between about 20,000 kilometers a second through to about 30,000 kilometers a second, depending on how you fit them. So even at those extreme ranges, your damage is nearly instantly applied. So small ships, even if you're at 70, 100 kilometers, and you see a Busha kind of trying to line up to jump a fleet of heavy ships onto you, you've got just enough time to kill it before it can finish its Bush cycle to jump the fleet onto you. So there's so many unique ways to use it. One of the things that I saw more recently as strengths of it was actually the missile speed in combination with fighting heavy armor fleets. There was a period of time where Nighthawks were being used heavily in Pochven, Ham Nighthawks and flavors of Ham doctrines. The missiles are quite slow on Ham ships, and so when those Ham platforms would fight heavy armor usually runs some smart bombs. The smart bomb wall would actually firewall as it's known, would wipe the missiles out before damage could be applied to anything. So effectively, the entire fleet just does no damage. But with the speed of the Barghest missiles, they actually, if you maintain the right range, they don't spend the second required within the smart bomb range to actually be killed by the smart bombs, and so they pass straight through and hit the enemy reliably. So it's almost like using a gunboat doctrine, if flown effectively. And they feel like they have some level of protection from running their smart bombs, but they really don't.
Yeah. It sounds like the flexibility really is kind of the big advantage there in terms of making use of them. I will also say one other thing that I found particularly enjoyable flying in Barghests is, especially when some groups realize they can't fight you for whatever reason, and you're flying around in, say, a very slow, heavy armor battleship doctrine, they would just spend their time throwing dictors at you on gates, and your travel around the region could be slowed to a crawl. And the Barghests, they're still battleships, but they burn faster, so you can get out of those bubbles much faster and keep moving. And they also have the rapid heavies, which let you blow up more of those dictors, because spending 10 minutes going through like 6 systems is just not fun.
It's more like 20 minutes to go through 2 systems or 1 system. If the it's called waterboarding is effective. Heavy armor, just you sit there on a gate watching dictors decloak, bubble you again, cloak or warp off or get back through the gate, and you just feel powerless about it. One thing we did try for a while with heavy armor, and it worked really well, was just everyone had to have an MJD fitted to jump out of the bubbles, get to the next gate, and that allowed us some mobility again. But just watching fleets get waterboarded and us doing it to other fleets, you can seriously make people take 20 minutes to go one jump, and it is, everyone just dies inside a little bit.
It got so bad at one point that Goran was flying paladins, like an Apex fleet, and they basically just canned the entire fleet because they got sick of being waterboarded so hard, and we moved on to, I think it was Macarials was our next choice. We eventually moved on to Barghests, but we wanted the faster, like MWD speed and warp speed as well, just to get out of the bubbles. It was that bad.
Yeah, I remember the Macarial Doctrine. You guys definitely got some really good fights out of that. One thing that Proxay did mention, and you are probably the best person to give us information on really how they fly and kind of a more in-depth understanding of their advantages, is the prevalence of Ishtars, particularly in the modern Pochven era, so to speak. Because not only were you in Horde, who flies a lot of Ishtars, but you are known on occasion to fly whole Ishtar fleets by yourself.
Occasionally, yep. So there's two variations of Ishtars that are prevalent in Pochven. There's the version I fly, which is an armor Ishtar, which I'll touch on in a second. But the more prevalent one is definitely the shield kite version, which is basically just a buffer shield tank, a couple of nanos or an overdrive in the lows, and as much damage as they can cram in, and an ADC. And the way that they run obses is they just basically outrun all the rats. The rats can't catch them. Occasionally, one Ishtar gets scrammed and they stop and wrap it, but they basically put their drones on the Imperial Navy Dreadnought and then just orbit it at 150 kilometers, and it can't hit them, and the rats can't catch them, and then they do the obs like that. They basically cheese the entire thing. So they're very quick, they're very slippery, and they're very hard to catch and kill, which is exactly why Proxy moved on to Barghests. That can, it's one of the few battleships that can keep up with them and slowly run them down and force them out of the obs. Because I think Frat and Horde's favorite strategy would literally just be, you finally get into the second room after being waterboarded for ages on the first room with all their dictors, and then they'd literally be 900 kilometers off burning off into Africa, and you'd never catch them. So the Barghests could actually, stand a chance of catching them. But the other version is I use an armor doctrine, and instead of outranging the Rev, I basically sig tank the Rev. And this enables me a couple of advantages. I can stand and fight a lot better. My resists and repping power are a lot higher than the shield versions. And it enables me to do things like brawl with some of the other multi-boxes like the Vargas and the Paladins. I'm able to orbit close with AB on and sig tank some of their damage while still fighting back, which the shield Ishtars definitely can't do.
And
as Dora mentioned as well, they're running away has probably been one of the more painful aspects of operating, because the way the larger groups operate is they'll have maybe 2 or 3 concurrent fleets, and because until the other day there was 3 flashpoints at all times in the triangle, no matter what, there was enough money to go around to justify having those numbers kind of sitting around latent. They would first send Ishtars to more distant areas to run the flashpoints and keep their heavier doctrines, like whether it's heavy armor like paladins and nesters and stuff, closer to home, tethered on their fort or anchored, something like that, docked up. Frat also adopted Barghests after a while in some form of flattery of our use of them. And they would kind of throw them out if they got challenged to run sites, as in the Ishtars were threatened by some group coming in and trying to kill them or steal the obs off them. They would then start moving their heavier fleets towards them to gang up 2 or 3 Ishtar fleets, or an Ishtar fleet plus a heavy armor fleet, or components thereof, to basically blob the people out of the area and protect their money-making endeavors. But the agility and speed of the Ishtars, and again the ability they can just drop the drones on the Rev and just run away, buys them a lot of time to bring the second fleet in while sustaining 0 losses effectively.
And I feel like you've touched on it a little bit, in particularly highlighting that your armor Ishtars have a little more flexibility, but I also want to talk a little bit like the combat capability of these Ishtars. Is it a fleet that can really stand up to anything else? Or does it need, backup either in the form of just more people, or, just not fighting at all and running away every time?
So a lot of it comes down to the FC's skill, because in the Doctrine, you basically, as an Ishtar pilot, you pretty much just drop your drones and assign them to the FC. He literally anchors for you, tells your drones where to go. The Logi has to pay a bit of attention. They have to rep. So like a good FC can always make something happen, but they're not tanky. They've got about 40k EHP. They're pretty squishy. They've got bad resists, and their damage type is susceptible to things like smart bombs, being boosted around. Like they're very abusable Doctrine. They're not, they're not like a paladin that can just sit and shoot out to 120 or whatever and just smash whatever comes close. So yes, you can make plays with them, but no, they're not. They're not like a mainline fighting Doctrine like a Barghest or a paladin. They're more about roaming the triangle, looking for obs that no one's doing, and then just getting in quickly and running it and getting out.
Okay. I think that makes sense. Now, and particularly, we talked a little bit about this, but the trend in Pochven, particularly in the most recent times, has been a bit of a skew to either the very heavy or the very casual, I feel, in terms of you either see people out in Paladins, Leshaks, Barghests, or you see people out in Ishtars. Do you think that's a fair assessment for these days?
Yeah, pretty fair. Maybe Chuck Barghests in there as well, but yeah, other than that, but there's pretty much only those three Doctrines, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, for folks that are interested in looking into Pochven, but don't necessarily want to either be stuck in Ishtars that aren't the greatest at fighting, or have to spend 2.5 billion per ship, Proxay, would you like to talk a little bit about a doctrine that I will admit we stole from toilet paper, at least a little bit, but the Vagabonds that we started running as kind of an Ishtar-specific counter and something that was just kind of fun to mess around in?
Stolen from toilet paper. I don't know. Maybe. Beta just one day. Beta Page. He was with Castle Kickers originally. In case people don't know him, but Castle Kickers is a small group that's just been around the triangle forever and ever and ever. Since Pochven Basics started, and they were known as seagulls. They made hundreds and hundreds of billions leeching off the sites before CCP changed the mechanics to only be the fleet members who did the most damage. Anyway, he one day is just like, I bought a whole bunch of Vagabonds, guys jump in Vagas with me, let's go hunt some Ishtars. And it's kind of like, how will this work? But the long and short of it is you kind of just charge in with Ishtars, and Ishtars are much faster. Sorry, Vagabonds are much faster than Ishtars to run them down. So you'll get on top of them reliably, scram them in position. You hope a little bit, there's a little bit of belief and faith that the Trigs will, so the incom rats will shoot the Ishtars with you and apply some extra damage and help push them over and kill them. But at the same time, it's also about just kind of zerging and just focusing on the enemy webs, Logi, and then finally their Ishtars. Each of the Vagabonds is also packed with its own remote Ancil rep, shield rep. So if you can ADC, you can get your mates to lock you up in time. You're all close together, applying hail directly to the face of anything you kind of catch. You should all be in optimal of remote Ancil reps. So there's this tremendous repping power. The Logi's kind of baked into the ships themselves, and you just kind of just give it all you got and just charge in.
Yeah, it's not the most applicable doctrine to every fight. I wouldn't recommend bringing Vagabonds against Paladins as a random example, but I did want to try and get that out there because I know that a lot of our guys, and you and me as well, have had a lot of fun flying those, and they're cheap and they work, so it's a lot of fun.
Well, if we're just like on the how to get into Pochven on the cheap, and you just want to run a flashpoint once or twice or something like that, just in something to make a bit of extra cash. There is stories about people clearing a flashpoint solo in a Lachesis, for example, right? And you're like, how the hell do you do that? The actual dread itself does not repair. It's just got passive shield regen. So as long as your DPS you do is the damage you do is a little bit higher than the shield regeneration, you will eventually kill the revelation, and that will spawn a Zenitra that will shoot the tower to finish the site. And so over a very long period of time, the site will eventually be finished. So in theory, if you want to get into doing this on the cheap, anything that does a little bit of damage and can run away from the incoming damage, and the NPCs have kind of this baked-in trigger to warp if you exceed about 50 kilometers from them. If you're just super fast, you just run away. You can delegate drones onto some key targets or something while you're running away. Then you can cheese the sights in almost anything.
I actually might be, of the people we're talking to, I might actually be the most experienced with that, if only because beta isn't here. And so the rest of Castle Kickers, for anyone who doesn't know them, they've been in Pochven the entire time. In terms of weird mechanics, they're going to know all the weird stuff. But I did spend quite a bit of time solo running Flashpoints, because obviously the money is quite ridiculous, as Dora can attest to, when you're doing it for yourself. But I actually utilized a method that took advantage of the standings mechanics in Pochven, where the rats in the second room, the Edencom ones, would actually not wake up if you started firing on the Zernitra with an account that was neutral to Edencom. And so what I would do is I would use one account to clear the initial rat waves in the site, and then what I needed to do was wait 20 minutes until the Dread and the rats there went to sleep, which is a unique Pochven mechanic entirely built around the fact that in Pochven, the rat AI is much more advanced than you'll see for most nullsec rats, and that consumes a lot of server resources. And so CCP's solution to not letting the hamsters burn out and die was the rats essentially fall asleep after a certain amount of inactivity. And so what you can do is let the rats fall asleep, go back in with bombers, a Talos, anything that doesn't get hit by the Dread, and just shoot the Dread. And if you do that, you can actually kill the Dread, then kill the tower that spawns afterwards, without essentially doing anything, because you're never getting shot the entire time. And I feel more comfortable talking about that now in this way, because it was something that was only really possible when Pochven was very quiet. Because you needed to slowly do the first couple waves with, your one ship or whatever. God forbid a Lachesis. I don't know how anybody did that. I did it in a Loki. But then you needed to wait 20 minutes where nobody else enters the site at all. And then you need another however many minutes to kill the Dread, to kill the tower. And so it was something that only worked when nobody was looking, essentially. But yeah, there was quite a bit of money to be made with that regard, until, I'd say once Horde got very active and Frat realized that things were active, once there were fleets cycling that regularly and Strybog picked back up, it really wasn't possible to do anymore, because there was always somebody going to the site with an actual fleet, which you couldn't do anything about.
I think you've kind of paved a way to a pretty interesting thing, which is stealing the site from someone else, which is a pretty interesting little mechanic. And you need a lot of experience with how the whole thing works in order to pull it off. But long and short of it is, until the tower at the very end is killed, it's kind of up for grabs. The fleet with the most damage done to things inside is the one that usually gets the payout. It's a little bit hard to gauge. There's no number that tells you who's done the most damage, or competition who's in the lead or whatever. But very often we'd come in with Barghests. There'd be Ishtars running on the inside. They will have killed the Rev or nearly killed it. We've been slowed down on the outside by their dictors relentlessly for the past however long, and we've only just gotten in just before the tower dies. Our strategy would be to put our Logi straight on the tower, keep that alive, remove all the drones from the Ishtars, kill them or run them off to an extreme range, and then once we've kind of secured the second room and prevented more damage being done to the tower, we then start killing every Edencom NPC we could, and sometimes even killing the Trig Zernitra, both sides, just trying to bring our damage numbers as high as possible to exceed whatever their damage numbers were. And at a certain point, we go, this might be enough. Usually there's no battleships left, or maybe the 10th respawn is happening or something. There's an Itra's dead, and then we let the tower die, and it's kind of like a wait and see on if you're going to get the payout or not. But that was interesting and kind of fun. Don't know if you've done that a bit, Dora.
Yeah, usually it's Frat that I victimize when I'm trying to invade because of the weak combat capabilities, I guess, of their Ishtar doctrine compared to mine. Whenever I go in, it depends what stage the side is at. If they're on the Rev still, I often focus more on killing them. I sometimes harass their drones to bring them into range. They try to put more drones on the Rev, and then I switch to the actual Ishtars, usually the Simis themselves. But if they've killed the Rev already, then like you said, it's kind of a race. You have to kill their drones off while keeping the tower alive and forcing them off, and then try and win the damage war as well. It becomes a real slog. Honestly, sometimes it's not even worth it. Before, when the sites were instantly respawning, it was often just easy to let them have it and chase their fleet around and maybe get some kills rather than battle it out with NPCs for a good hour or so that it takes. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting and unique site mechanic in that regard. For who gets paid.
Oh, it's always worth it, mate. Always.
True. Yeah.
I think it's one of those things. Is like a lot of the people run the sites to make the money. I think most of us have made enough money, so I'm in it for the kills. I'm in it for the salt. If we can get someone a little bit upset at us, that's motivation enough. So I'd go in regardless and always try and have a crack at it, just because if I can stop them getting 3.5 billion, I don't really care about the payout for ourselves. I just really want to take it from them because they've either run away from the fight or they're using this max money, no commitment kind of approach. They're not really in it for anything other than just printing as much cash as they can. I want to punish that, and I want to deny them all the money I can. That's 100% worth it every time for me. I'll give it a go.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Alright, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the different kinds of ships that people are flying in Pochven. I want to get, one of my favorite things to do talking about this is get a particular favorite fight or one of your favorite fights that you've had in Pochven. Particularly when I did this last time with the heavy armor, a lot of really cool stories came out. So I'll give you a sec to think about that. I'll talk a little bit about one of my favorite fights, which was way back when we were just learning kind of the ins and outs of Pochven. We were doing the world's most basic heavy armor with Leshaks and Nestors and trying to figure out what was going on. We had a fight with Goons where they had a Praxis fleet at the site back when that was popular, and we went and engaged that. But their trap was that they had another Praxis fleet in the area that we had not scouted. And I remember us coming out pretty even in the end, but it was definitely a real stress test of a lot of ideas we hadn't really fully thought out yet in terms of what kind of ships, how they should be fit, the challenges of certain things with E-War and Bushing and all these things that we really weren't thinking that much about. And I just remember really coming away from that fight like wow, there's so much more we can be doing in these fights. And I think that's one of the most fun things about Pochven, is that constant evolution of tactics and challenges that has come as people learn how to fight around these sites, and people are willing to put in the work because these sites are worth so much. So, what do you guys got?
I guess I'll go first. I have a few favorite fights, but they all generally involve me taking a fight against usually Marauders, either Vargas or Paladins, and then managing to either through site mechanics or good piloting or getting lucky and things like that to score a few kills and forcing the vastly superior in terms of numbers or power, force that fleet off and then winning the site, or at least getting some kills if I don't win the site. So my the number one would be I was inside an OBS, and there used to be a very prevalent multi-boxer by the name of Ellendell, who no longer is around anymore, and he has a friend called Miracle, and they both basically fly 12 to 15 Vargas each. And in a few days earlier to this fight, I'd actually had Miracle try to invade my second room, and I'd set up really well, and using my dual positive standings, I'd basically spawned the Rev, which wouldn't attack me, and all the rats are just lying dormant, like you said earlier. And I waited until he came in, and because he is not dual positive, he's negative to Edencom, they all aggress him. And because the Rev had been up for a little while, it had sieged and was doing maximum damage, all the rats were neuting, and I was able to kill 5 or 6 of his Vargas while keeping a few of them bubbled on the outside as well, before he basically just had to warp out. I couldn't keep everything tackled because I only have 2 scrams. But so fast forward to this fight, he's realized that, hey, maybe Dora's not, the person to mess with exactly. So he brought his friend with his Vargas as well. And I basically did the exact same thing, fought both of them and managed to kill a bunch of Vargas again. And the exact same sort of situation happened. So that was probably my favorite fight.
I think one of the advantages for you there as well is most of his Vargas are 1400mm fit. So when you're armor tanked in AB, like he can't hit you.
Exactly. And fortunately for me, the rats and the Rev went for some of his ones that are not the AC fit ones that had better tracking and wiped them out first. So I was actually able to stay on grid a lot longer than I thought I would be able to.
Was it super sieged as well, or just normal siege?
Just normal siege. Wasn't quite super siege, but yeah.
Super sieged for listeners is when after 20 minutes the dread, it's kind of like a sudden death mechanic, doubles its damage. So already the dread is doing capital gun damage with Hor gun tracking, so it's pretty brutal to tank. I think our Barghests can take 2 wrecking hits from a normal dread, and they might just pop instantly. But a super siege dread would reduce that threshold to basically 1 hit, and we'd lose a 3 to 5 billion ISK battleship. But same for his Vargas as well. They're all active tanked, so they just melt. I have 2 favorite fights. I'd like to start with the second one first, which is a little while ago, Frat hadn't really had many chances to fight our Barghests with their heavy armor, which is, 5 to 8 paladins, 3 to 4 nesters, some Lashaks, Balgorn, etc. Vindicator sometimes, Kronos, mix of things like that. And so they're inside the site, and we've got our, 8 to 10 Barghests, which aren't really that threatening when you've got those numbers of Marauders and Nesters. Like on raw damage alone, you aren't punching through anything. But they were inside the site. They'd actually finished the Revelation off, and they were sitting on the double damage pylon. So all their Marauders are now doubled up in damage. And we were like, fuck it, let's send it. If we die, we die. But let's have a crack at this. So we punch into the site with all our Barghests and our 4 Lokis for reps. 5 Lokis for reps at that time, sorry. Land on grid. My Barghest, and I'm the anchor for our Bargs to hold range and stuff, missed the gate activation. I don't know, laggy clicks or whatever, or I'm just shit at the game. Choose one. But our guys managed to pull to range off their paladins, losing only 1 Loki in the process. So we're down to 4 Lokis. I got into the site and moved in as well. And then we were able to hold range and start just crashing dictors through into the site, one after another, to keep them bubbled on their pylon where they felt strong and powerful, and slowly start cutting through them. When we figured out we could tank their damage because we'd killed 2 or 3 of them, we moved on to the other double damage pylon after killing theirs, and basically turned our 10 Barghests into 20 and just tore their fleet apart and killed them almost to a man. It represented about, they lost about 22 plus billion ISK there. 5 Paladins down, Kronos down, 3 Lashaks, 2 Nesters died, Phobos died, etc. And we only took the 1 Loki as the loss and a bunch of really light support. But the best one, the hardest fight, is actually one that was super recently. Frat never fought us again in heavy armor versus Barghests 1-on-1. They thought they could beat us. They learned they couldn't, so they never did that again. But Mina Deathral, one of the Fried FCs, adopted the Barghests doctrine themselves. They fitted out exactly the same as us. We're talking abyssal micro warp drives, faction launchers, faction smart bombs, X-type newts, everything. Like they did not cut costs. Every person there's running mid or high grade Nirvana pods. So we're talking frat rolling the most bling possible fleet. We had a mirror match against them where we had one Barghest less than them and one Loki less than them. We were on a site. There was 2 sites in the one system. They had just finished the first one. We were sitting on the second one. I kind of figured they were going to come to this one, so I set up and waited a little bit. And as they came in, we started trying to pull range. They fit a little bit differently to us, though. We fit super speed on our missiles to go, 20, 30, 25 to 30 kilometers a second. They fit maximum tank, no points, generally maybe a scram here and there on their Barghests, but they also don't fit missile speed rigs or missile guidance enhancers. They actually fit a second overdrive, so they're faster than us in a drag race. They ran us down with a broadsword and their scram Barghest going, 3.5k a second basically. They were eventually able to scram, so I was down. I balled us up to sit on top of each other in our Barghests. We, almost lost a Loki. One of our 4 Lokis dipped to about 20% structure, but we were using our smart bombs and their slower missiles to firewall their missiles before they could hit the Loki, helping it stay alive. And we were able to sit there just on top of each other in these super fast kiting battleships, actually brawling as if we're a bunch of blaster Chronoses. And we were able to cut through their Logi. And once they started losing their second and third Loki, they just started scrambling in every direction. We were able to lock down 2 or 3 more Barghests and kill them, but it was given the broadsword, given the scrams on their bargs, it was a fight to the death. Either one of us was going to lose the whole fleet, basically. There was no way out once it were fully engaged, and that was really difficult. And also, just showed like those small differences in fit can be exploited to actually create opportunities or advantages that maybe they weren't aware of, or maybe they knew, but they were confident in their greater numbers and greater logi that they'd be able to pull through.
Yeah, definitely some fantastic examples from both of you, really, in terms of like really understanding the advantages of the composition you're flying and then utilizing it to the fullest. I think that's pretty much everything I want to talk about. We've also been talking for a while at this point. So I think I'll just real quickly, obviously, the big change to Pochven that's coming up or happening or going to happen, has happened, I don't know. That's coming is that the Flashpoint respawn time is going from what was functionally 0, it was like a minute or 2, something like that, but functionally 0, up to a 90-minute respawn timer for the 3 flashpoints that bounce around Pochven. What do you guys think that's going to do to the activity levels, maybe to the meta? Let's start with Dora.
Unfortunately, we've already seen what it's going to do. It's devastating. I really wish CCP had gone the other way, just reducing the payout and still, having the timers, maybe, a 10-minute, 15-minute respawn. But it's just decimated the activity levels. No one's putting up fleets. The people that are autistic, autistically camping the obs, like myself and a few other groups, are the ones running them now. You can't really convince someone, to put up a fleet on the chance that within 90 minutes they might get a single obs to fight over. You just can't. Like, people have lives. People, they want to do things with their family. They've got other games they want to play. It's just, it's not sustainable like that. And it's it's a pretty big disappointment, in my opinion, that CCP went that route instead of the other changes that they could have made. But
Yeah, I feel like I'm trying to read the tea leaves a little bit here with what their stated reasons are. They said they were happy with destruction numbers and unhappy with generation numbers, and they wanted to calibrate it, probably to bring generation down and destruction stable, I guess. The thing is, speaking as someone who doesn't give a toss about money or crabbing, it's a symbiotic relationship though between people who want to make money and people who want to fight. Generally, people who want to fight will hunt the people who are making money, and hopefully their cousins and brothers and stronger siblings will come along and beat you up in response, and you can have a bit of a good old-fashioned fight over something or other. But the way they by reducing the quantity of sites, the scarcity, we'll call it, the extreme scarcity they've introduced, what's there to fight over? People won't crab, therefore there's no one for me to hunt. Therefore, what's the content for me as a fighter? Like, as Dora said, 10, 15 minutes is what I'd be saying is actually a good time. I think that's a great change. Maybe I'm alone in that, but 10, 15 minutes to me versus instantaneous is a very big mental shift in how we'd play the region. Instead of hunting for an obs to get to quickly, we would be chasing fleets to watch where they're going, to gives us time to close the distance between us and them. So you can't just sit 12, 13 systems away in an Ishtar fleet, hope it spawns next to you and quickly snatch it. Like, you'd give me time to move my fleet around to sit with you or near you, whether they're docked or not, who cares, and more chance to intercept and fight over the sites. If they're worried about generation and Ishtars are just being used to cheese the sites with no destruction because they don't fight, except for Dora and a couple others, then make the sites more effective at killing Ishtars. Neutralize the effectiveness of that doctrine so people are forced to use brawlier, slower, heavier doctrines that are easier to catch and fight, because that'll bring destruction numbers up and probably bring generation numbers down. But again, this is like just trying to read what their rationale is. The actual outcome of their change is I'm not going to be forming a fleet with, because it would take 4 or 5 hours for me to pre-find all the sites as they spawn over that 90-minute respawn timer, you know, through camping every single system and watching for them spawning, noting when they finish, knowing when the next one will appear in terms of time, then kind of putting a call out to my guys going, hey guys, let's get together and get ready. In 30 minutes, one will spawn. If we're ready for it, we can get to it and possibly fight over it. I don't have 4 or 5 hours in a day to do this. I have 2 hours, maybe 3 hours sometimes. So I'm not going to bother with Pochven at all as a result of this, because I just don't have the time for it.
And it's not just it's not just the money from the obs as themselves that is being removed. Like, when I'm running obs, I've made friends with all these guys that just do salvaging, you know, like the people that hunt the salvages, the guys gate camping, looking for the people moving between, you know, sites, scouting for their fleets and stuff. All these people now have no content either. There's literally, like, I'm flying around the region and it's been dead the last few days. It's been really disappointing. You know, like, I don't know. I feel like the destruction is just going to drop off a cliff. Like, people are still going to run the obs when they spawn. It's going to be hard capped at, you know, the 90 minutes and whatever it takes to run the site, 20 minutes, or call it 2 hours. So 3 obs every 2 hours. It's going to be, you know, mathematically capped at that. But the destruction side is just going to absolutely plummet. So yeah, very disappointed.
They're going to have the exact opposite of the outcome they wanted, which was stable destruction, lower generation. They're just going to have zero destruction, super high generation, or high, like, you know,
comparatively,
generation. Yeah, and the ratio is just going to be completely fucked, and it'll go from being the second most destructive region of the game to probably down there with Outer Ring or Outer Ring or something, which is just a ghost town. Like, as I said before, like myself, I'm sitting in Lozak right now. I'm not in Pochven, and I'm probably not going back there until something changes to generate something for me to fight, bring people there for me to fight, because in my limited time in the game, I'm going to do whatever's going to bring me the most fun per hour. Otherwise, it's not really worth my time.
A bleak outlook, but honesty is the best step to moving forward, and obviously both you and, hey, me too, I had a lot of fun in Pochven, and I want to see it be a place where fun can continue to occur, particularly around the observatory flashpoints, which have generated much enjoyment. Well, thank you both so much for finding the time to do this. I'm still sad we couldn't get everybody together, but I that was doomed. It was never going to happen. So we'll settle for this. We'll get some words from the EU folks, stitch it all together.